it's just crazy to me how mismanaged this was, like from the top down.
Crystal Tools ended up being over-optimized for Final Fantasy XIII, right? And Final Fantasy XIII is an incredibly linear game. It is built around corridor design, and Versus was supposed to be the opposite. That was an open world game. This is them developing a world-class engine, top of the top shelf, having to essentially compress an entire trilogy down into a single game, and having to basically speed run the whole thing.
It's so crazy that anyone thought that this was a good idea.
If you really want to pinpoint the mismanagement, it kind of starts there. It always goes back to that area and that period where they were trying to do a lot of ambitious things, and everything they were trying to do sounded really cool on paper. Unfortunately, the implementation of those things and the way they proceeded just didn't work out.
All right. Today we have good friend of the show, Ryan, also known as the Night Sky Prince on YouTube, here to talk about the development history of Final Fantasy XV. He just put out just a really, really excellent, comprehensive video that tells the story of the turbulent history of the development of Final Fantasy XV in a way that I have not seen anywhere else on YouTube or online anywhere. And I wanted to point as many people to that video as possible because it is just phenomenally researched and super high quality video. So first of all, thank you for making it in the first place. It was a really, really, really fun watch. And I was thinking back, and it blew me away that this year is going to be the 10th anniversary of Final Fantasy XV. That's like unbelievable to me.
Nothing makes me feel older, right? And it's been 20 years since Versus was first announced.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah. And we're still talking about this.
Wow. Yeah. But this was super nostalgic for me too, just because I know for you, that's right around when you started your channel, was like up to the release of Final Fantasy XV. Ours had been started a little earlier than that, but we didn't really focus on it like in earnest until around that time. Because we had a different channel. We started around 2011, and we were primarily on that until around 2016, when we sort of switched to doing this gaming stuff. And it was, again, right up to that release of Final Fantasy XV. So we were covering a lot and talking about it a lot. Kaysen actually did a video on the div history of Final Fantasy XV leading up to its release, from what info we had at the time.
Yeah. And this was like as it was coming out. Like in your video, you reference interviews that happened just within the past couple of years, you know?
Right.
And your video went way more in depth. I was able to learn a whole ton from that. But I did what I could back at the time.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, first of all, what inspired you to kind of jump back into Final Fantasy XV now?
So we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary for the game. And as we're coming up on that anniversary, I kind of realized that Square Enix is absolutely not going to do anything for this game for its 10th anniversary. It's kind of sad. They recently closed the official page for the game. They basically said that there's going to be no more updates on the official FF15 Twitter, which is like really sad because that's like right ahead of the 10th anniversary. And it kind of felt like for a lot of fans that they're basically saying, yeah, forget this thing ever existed. And I can kind of understand their position on why, right? Because how much turbulence the development of this game caused, and then some of the fallout that happened as a result, and people feeling like the game was incomplete. And, you know, honestly speaking, it was incomplete in multiple different ways. Some ways I didn't even realize until I did my research and spoke to some people in the community. But, you know, I just really wanted to revisit this game because it's also, you know, as you mentioned, I kind of started my channel with Final Fantasy XV. So it kind of means that I'm also coming up on like a 10th anniversary next year. So this is kind of also leading into my own anniversary as a content creator. So I'm going back to where it all started.
Diving back into it, how much more info was available in terms of like development history now that surprised you or that you hadn't seen covering the game in the past?
A lot of stuff did come out in, I would say, the years following it, as they were trying to essentially patch back in all of the content that they weren't able to finish. But I think the thing that actually changed the most, at least for me, was kind of the perspective. So I think that in the moment when you're really disappointed and you just can't believe it happened, it's really hard to process. Like, you know, they just wanted to make the game incomplete so that they could sell all this content. And there definitely was financial incentive to making Final Fantasy XV a universe rather than a single complete release. Right. But a lot of it also came out of the fact that they had this 2016 mandate and they had to produce a game by the end of 2016. Any game, no matter what state it was in, you have to ship. And so because of that, they had this pressure to include all of the things that fans were looking forward to since the Versus days, like the Insomnia invasion, but also things like the characters being developed, like their backstories and stuff like that. And so I think I really came away with a sense of empathy for the people working on this project. And, you know, the kind of struggle that they had to go through because of the mistakes of higher level management, right? And, you know, just how long things had been mismanaged and how that had just compiled on top of each other. And so, you know, you think about other games, and I mentioned this in the video, you know, God of War 2018 taking 5 years to develop, a game of much more narrow scope. Or then Horizon Zero Dawn taking like 6 years. Or even a game like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is open world and has quite a great deal of content. But they were starting with an engine, assets, and code that they'd already made from Final Fantasy VII Remake, right?
Yeah.
And so this is them developing a world-class engine, you know, top of the top shelf, having to essentially compress an entire trilogy down into a single game, and having to basically speed run the whole thing.
It's so crazy that anyone thought that this was a good idea to even attempt, given the constraints, just given like the deadlines and given all the work that was going into all the different components. I mean, any one of those things, you know, let's not build a proprietary engine for this game. Let's use an existing one. Anything that would have made development easier. It's just crazy to me how mismanaged this was, like from the top down.
Right. And then, you know, even with the creation of Luminous, right? That had to happen because, you know, the game was originally planned to run on Crystal tools. And the story there is pretty infamous, but to make a long story short, for those that don't know, Crystal tools ended up being over-optimized for Final Fantasy XIII, right? And Final Fantasy XIII is an incredibly linear game. It is built around corridor design, and Versus was supposed to be the opposite. That was an open world game. And so, I mean, first of all, you know, engines that are made to accommodate open world games are usually very different than, say, engines that are made to accommodate linear games, because just the way that they have to handle so much complex data being loaded in is usually quite different, right? And so some engines can kind of accommodate both. Unreal Engine can kind of accommodate both, but usually you end up optimizing in extremes for one or the other, right? It seems to me the better idea there would have been to optimize probably for the open world game first. And then, you know, it'd be a lot easier to make tweaks to say optimize that for the linear game, right? But the reverse happened here. So whenever you had to render like these very big environments that were supposed to seamlessly load in, of course you're going to hit a memory wall. Of course, because it's not designed for that. It's designed to accommodate for very tight corridors, right? And so that's exactly what happened. They over-optimized for Final Fantasy XIII. And then when it came to making games that had more open fields, like Final Fantasy XIV and Final Fantasy Versus XIII, they had tremendous technical issues. And so, if you really want to pinpoint the mismanagement, it kind of starts there. It always goes back to that area and that period where they were trying to do a lot of ambitious things, and everything they were trying to do sounded really cool on paper. Unfortunately, the implementation of those things and the way they proceeded just didn't work out.
Let's step back here for just a second to the announcement of Final Fantasy Versus XIII, for those who aren't familiar with what that is. Originally, what became Final Fantasy XV was announced as part of a collection of games based on the same mythology, the Fabula Nova Crystallis, which was going to include Final Fantasy XIII, the mainline series game, what became Final Fantasy Type 0, but was originally Final Fantasy Agito 13.
Oh, Agito. That's
and
right.
then Final Fantasy Versus 13. These were 3 different games, all meant to be a part of the same universe, same mythos. And of the 3, I think for a lot of us, the one we were most excited for was Final Fantasy Versus 13. This was going to be sort of directed, spearheaded, written, conceived by Tetsuya Nomura. And it was kind of like his brainchild, his baby, something that after the success of Kingdom Hearts, he, was going to be, we thought, dedicating kind of his full effort to this big project, this big story that was all his. It was announced for the PlayStation 3, and I bought a PlayStation 3 specifically because I wanted to play that game. And like anything else that might come out on it was just a bonus cherry on top. Even Final Fantasy 13, I was like, that looks cool. But I am buying into this because I want to play Final Fantasy Versus 13. Was that kind of the same for you, or what was your sort of initial reaction to or introduction to Versus 13 as a project?
That was my exact reaction. And I don't want to say I wasn't excited for Final Fantasy XIII. I was crazy excited for that game. I imported it in Japanese and played
nice.
it. And I was like looking at a translation guide, and now it's obviously a lot easier for me to go back because I've been studying Japanese for like 4-ish years now. I have recently just got a tutor, but at that time I was just completely going in barely able to read katakana and stuff like that to help me navigate menus. And so I was very excited for 13, but Versus 13 was it had a sort of appeal, I think, that was really resonant at that era, especially visually, right? Because in Japan, you had Visual Kei, and that was a very popular aesthetic movement. And then here in the West, you had emo, right? Yeah. So I think that and Nomura's era of designs at that point were almost engineered in a lab to appeal to that generation of kids growing up, right? Because it just looks so cool. And so, combine that with perhaps a little bit more edgy presentation, like the idea that Final Fantasy was going to show blood, and it was also going to have this more dark, mature air to it. I think that was really appealing to people. And also, I think that Kingdom Hearts, now Square is trying to struggle to make Final Fantasy a world-class action game.
Right.
But it's so amazing when you go back to Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, how Nomura and his team basically did it on the first try. On the very first attempt, they made one of the best action RPGs of all time. And so for something especially Kingdom Hearts 2, and even better with its final mix release, to transition that back into Final Fantasy, and now you can play as all of the characters, it was just such an awesome premise.
Yeah.
Right.
And to set the timeline here, this was at E3 2006 when it was announced, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that would have been somewhere around like what, May, June,
Yeah.
something like that, 2006. And you know, back then, this is like at the birth of HD consoles and things like that. So we were still used to dev cycles not being, you know, these super long affairs.
Right.
You know, like I remembered expecting a Legend of Zelda game at least once every 5 years at the time, but that was one of the longer cycles during that era. Like Final Fantasy games were coming out like once a year through like the 90s. Maybe that was gearing up a little bit more because I think that, let's see, Final Fantasy XII came out, I think, right around that same time. So, and then Final Fantasy XI had been, what, 2 or 3 years earlier. So maybe they were getting to the point where you might wait like a couple years in between. But nobody...
but remember, even when you mentioned Legend of Zelda, 5 years is high. Like between Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, it was only 4 years, and that was after Twilight Princess got delayed.
Yeah.
And then before that, 2 years previous was Majora's Mask. 2 years previous was Ocarina of Time. It was even less than 5 years. It was like, and that was still on the high end, right?
Yeah.
From Wind Waker to Twilight Princess, 4 years. That felt like long, like too long.
Time.
Something went wrong, right?
That's true. And so once we enter the HD era of gaming, you know, it started really ramping up the development time for a lot of games. But even still, 2006 to 2016 is just an insanely long time. So what happened between the announcement of Versus XIII in 2006 to make this take 10 years before something is actually delivered?
Quite a lot. But the main two things were waiting on Crystal Tools to be finished, because whenever you have an in-house engine, essentially you can only make as much of the game as the engine will currently allow, right? And so because of that, you have a lot of stalls in development that are going to inevitably happen. And this also happened with Final Fantasy XIII as well, where Motomu Toriyama was saying, you know, at one point they were just kind of like sitting around creating assets and they weren't even able to like really progress in developing the game itself because there was no engine. And so they thought, okay, well, we'll just have the assets ready to go when the engine is at a further point in development. And so because of that, you have like a lot of stalls. It takes a long time. You're basically building a house and setting the foundation all at the same time, which is really complicated and messy to do. So
let's step back for just 1 second. Just for those who have absolutely no idea what we're talking about with terms like Crystal Tools, Luminous. What is a game engine, and why on earth would a game publisher want to create their own game engine instead of using sort of an existing third-party engine?
So you can think of a game engine as like a suite of tools and libraries that make a game easy to port and to develop. You typically has things like a level editor, scripting tools, and a bunch of other features in order to support you making a game faster. A lot of low-level work is essentially constructed within this game engine, and it operates as a platform for you to begin building the content that is the game on top of, right? And so once that is removed, you can kind of focus on just actually building the game's content, right? In earlier generations, a lot of the times games were very much hard-coded, or they would build the engine around the game. But games back then were a lot less complex than they are now in terms of the visuals and the performance and the types of things that they try to achieve mechanically. And so as you build those more complex systems, it just makes more sense to have those things done ahead of time, instead of trying to build it all at the point of when you're making the game, because software has just gotten much more complex on that end. And Crystal Tools, and the reason why any developer would want to make their own engine is because you may have ideas that are unique to your project and you want an engine that is optimized to it. There are also royalty fees that you have to pay to the creators of the engine. For example, whenever you use Unreal Engine, you have to pay a 5% royalty. But if you make your own engine, you don't have to pay that 5% royalty.
No,
So,
you have to pay 50% of your budget instead.
Yeah.
But that's budget,
and that's,
not gross. So, okay, yeah, it's different.
Right. And but the alternative look at that is that you're making an investment. So you're saying that we can make this engine up front, and the game that we're making on the engine will front the cost. And then all subsequent games that we make will eventually will recoup the profit, right?
That's a good point. Just so for people who don't know, Nintendo makes all of their own engines even still. I think Monolith Soft helped with some of their more recent stuff. But they get away with it. You know, it's like Square Enix. That's just how everyone used to do it. And this is back in the day, 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't such a given that you would just use Unreal Engine, right? The kind of the old way of thinking was still pretty prevalent at the time, where it's like, we got to make our own engine. That's what we've always done.
Right. And it's not to say that like everyone should use Unreal Engine, or there aren't legitimate use cases for developing your own engine, right? We can look at, for example, RE Engine that Capcom has made, which has done really phenomenal. You know, you go play like Resident Evil 9, and it's like there's nothing else out there that looks that good. It's incredible. Nice. So there's definitely cases for it, and I can really see why they would want to make their own engine, especially for Final Fantasy Versus XIII and 15, right? This ambitious open world that is also supposed to have like these crazy set pieces in them. And Unreal Engine 3 at the time, probably not going to be suitable enough for it. And so building their own engine did make sense financially, because originally they wanted to build games like Kingdom Hearts 3 on this engine. That didn't happen.
That's
they eventually They
speaking of like more delays.
That's actually really interesting, because you bring up RE Engine, right, which is used for the Resident Evil games, but it's also used for games like Monster Hunter and Dragon's Dogma, and like other games that Capcom makes. And so Square was wanting to do that, where they were going to develop a bunch of their other games using, at the time, Crystal Tools, which is what was being developed for Final Fantasy XIII. But that ended up not happening, right? That ended up like they didn't use it for Kingdom Hearts 3. And then Luminous the same way. Luminous has been used for maybe Forspoken, but
2 games.
Like nothing else. So what were the problems with Crystal Tools first? Because Crystal Tools came first, where that did not end up working for Final Fantasy Versus XIII. And then why did they decide they have to make another engine again? And then why has that engine not been used for games like Final Fantasy XVI, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Kingdom Hearts 3, and so on?
You're right. So essentially in 2012, they were trying to put together an alpha build for Versus XIII. And the initial plan is that they wanted to game the PS3 and PS4, considering how long it was taking.
Sorry, I have
what it all comes down.
One sec. 2012, they were going to build an alpha build for a game they announced 6 years ago. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Hold on. Okay,
this will tie in backwards. I know this is like a weird starting point, but I think this kind of
was Nomura still in charge at this point?
Yes, he was still in charge. In fact, this kind of like signifies the end.
I feel bad for the guy. That's unacceptable. Okay, keep going.
So they were trying to use the technology that they currently have with Crystal Tools, and this ties back to the memory wall that I mentioned earlier with Final Fantasy XIII. So again, Crystal Tools, very designed for one specific game, Final Fantasy XIII. And the problem there is that Final Fantasy XIII's development was taking too long because they were trying to accommodate for Final Fantasy XIV, and they were trying to accommodate for Versus as well, right? And so at some point, management was just like, you know what? Get Final Fantasy XIII out of the door. Make Crystal Tools do whatever it needs to do to get that first game out, and we'll fix it later. We'll make it work somehow for the other games. And it did not work at all. They end up having to rework Final Fantasy XIV entirely. Basically, A Realm Reborn is a remake, realistically speaking. And then Versus, also another issue that happened is that they had to take staff off of Versus to help finish Final Fantasy XIII because it got behind schedule because of how long Crystal Tools was taking. And then they had to take staff off of Versus again to work on Final Fantasy XIV 2.0 because the engine would not support 1.0.
That's okay. Okay, so how many games were actually made using Crystal Tools? Were all the Final Fantasy 13 games made with it?
Like 2 and 3 or whatever.
I believe so. This is actually kind of weird. Technically, the entire 13 trilogy, also oddly enough, Dragon Quest X, the MMO, also runs on Crystal Tools. Which is really strange to think about, but yes. And then 14's current engine is like a weird amalgamation of mostly Crystal Tools. And like they revamped it when they were working on A Realm Reborn. And then also they pulled in some code from Luminous as well. And then they also did some other work on top of all that. So it's like this Frankenstein engine of all those things. And then Final Fantasy XVI's engine is like an evolution again of 14's engine.
Crazy. So it's probably by the time we get to 16, you can no longer really call it Crystal Tools. It's become something else. But 14, A Realm Reborn, was like a sort of patched Crystal Tools that would work better or is more optimized for the open fields of an MMO.
Right. So it's pretty heavily reworked. It's something that Yoshi P would still describe as like a new technology from like what I've read. So I don't know how accurate it would be to still call it Crystal Tools, but my understanding is that engine is still forked from a lot of what Crystal Tools had going on.
Okay. But outside of that, it seems like there's not really much they did with it. It seemed to be primarily made specifically to make Final Fantasy XIII. And outside of that specific use case, it didn't have much in terms of like legs or like applicability to other types of games that Square wanted to make.
Right. And Yoshi P was curious about using Luminous for Final Fantasy XVI. But then when he spoke with, they were called Business Division 2 at the time, when he spoke with them, they did not have any documentation ready, right? And so how can you onboard people? How can you train people to use a suite of tools when there is no documentation? There's no tutorials made, and they're currently working on, still fixing up Final Fantasy 15. So it's not like they could just take time off of that and then help them make 16, right? With Luminous. So they just decided, well, we're just going to use the tech that we already have and start building something else with it.
This is baffling to me. And it really sets the stage for why things not only took as long as they did, but why things changed as much as they did from what the original project started being into what Final Fantasy XV became. If you have a concept for a game that you want to make, but you don't have an engine that supports making that game, how can you even get started? And that's what it sounds like happened is for a lot of the time span, because even Final Fantasy XIII was in development for a very long time. Yeah, they couldn't really make the game because they didn't have the software they would need to make the game. It wasn't completed. Right. and they were waiting around, sitting on their thumbs, like you said, maybe making assets. And there was plenty of assets to go around. They kept showing those off in trailers and stuff like that all throughout the years. And it looked really beautiful. They had really cool models and all these great effects and really interesting visual concepts. But there was no game. Like, it baffles my mind.
I thought about this. I think I have something here. Do you remember when Nintendo in the year 2000 was showing off GameCube hardware and they made that Zelda demo?
Yes.
That people were excited about because they thought that would be what the next Zelda game would be. This is before Wind Waker was announced. It was the purpose of that demo was not to sell a game. It was to sell the system. And here's the thing. PlayStation 1 gained tremendous success off of Final Fantasy VII. And the PlayStation 2 really launched it after Final Fantasy X. But Square had nothing for the PS3 at launch or within the first year or so. And it's almost like to help Sony sell units, you both bought PS3s because of these demos. In order to help Sony, they had these demos not to help themselves. It proved to be detrimental to themselves, but for their relationship with Sony, which they had this great partnership that recently was broken because Square has not been able to deliver. But that they were doing something. I believe this was for the benefit of Sony, not for the benefit of Square Enix. And this would function somewhere along the lines of like a demo to sell consoles. And that was the point. And they were trying to keep their relationship good with Sony, knowing that we don't have anything to help you sell this console this time. But here's what we can do. We're going to show people what the new console can do. Something like that. Now, this is totally speculative on my part. But I think it's telling that they always had, and Final Fantasy XII just couldn't be it. They always had something at the beginning of each Sony console.
Yeah.
Not this time.
Yeah. And those development times took longer, but hey, those tech demos could really sell people, right? I mean, like when you saw like the Final Fantasy VII tech demo for PS3, and you saw Cloud hop off the train and how he looked in Advent Children, and
that's
now it's happening in real time. Yeah.
And we thought that was going to be a real
PS3.
game. We thought that was going to be a game, and it sort of eventually became one, but not for the PS3. Yeah. But here's the thing: like, just in your research, would Sony have had anything to do with this? Because Square Enix kind of ruined their brand to help sell PS3s.
Right.
That just sounds weird unless there was a deal, right? Do you have any info on that?
I don't think that there's any public information on them having a deal at the time, especially because that's kind of like when Yoichi Wada was actually pushing more for multi-platform. It was really Yosuke Matsuda once he became the CEO. So that's the CEO after Wada, for anyone who doesn't know. But not the current CEO, who is Takashi Kiryu. He was really the one that kind of pushed multi-platform, Wada. And then Matsuda was the one who kind of dialed back and decided to start pursuing console exclusivity again. And I understand that for some people, kind of having that relationship doesn't make sense. But actually, you offload a lot of the risk whenever you take those exclusivity checks. And so, if Sony is willing to fund your project for you to, and you're able to offload that risk, then that's a pretty huge thing. Yeah. But it also means that you're locking in your audience to a specific platform. So, whether that risk is worth it or not, I would suppose not, because they've announced that they're moving away from it in a pretty aggressive manner. So,
yeah. But that is always the deal, right? You help us, we help you, right? Like Sony helps advertise games on the PlayStation platform.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting.
But Final Fantasy XIII was a multi-plat game, so it came out on Xbox 360 as well as PlayStation 3.
Yeah.
I believe they were both launched, right? Like it came out on both of them at the same time. It wasn't like a exclusivity for 6. Yeah, so they both launched at the same time.
Interesting.
Right.
So anyway, it's Kaysen and I have talked about this a lot over the years. It is almost always a massive mistake, as far as I am concerned, to announce a game with what looks like finished assets and animation and stuff like that when you have absolutely no game to support that.
Right.
And Final Fantasy XIII and Versus XIII are like prime examples of this, because when those trailers launched at E3 2006, those looked like polished, near finished games.
Yeah.
Like Square Enix artists are fantastic. Their animators are fantastic. They always have been. So you see that and you go, wow, that battle system is like in motion. It looks like the game is running. What you saw in the 2006 demo that they showed at E3 has nothing to do with the combat that eventually was implemented for Final Fantasy XIII. Like, the combat is a totally different looking thing, 100%. I can't stress enough, there was no game at this time. And so they were just showing characters, showing a world, you know, music, what seemed like finished assets, when there was, I mean, almost literally zero game to support it at the time. Which is, in my opinion, a horrible move, because it limits what pivots you can now make in development, because you've already made promises. Here's what our main character looks like. Here is like what their abilities are and like what they can do. And in Final Fantasy Versus XIII's case, the warp mechanic, where you like throw the sword and like warp forward, was a problem for the developers all the way up to like the end of development of what changed into Final Fantasy XV, was like getting that to work and for the game to perform, you know, at a standard that was acceptable. So if you're going to show that off, then players have the expectation that that's going to be in the game. Now you've locked yourself into a corner where you have to deliver that. And that is essentially the foot off of which games like Final Fantasy XIII and Versus XIII got off on, and it is entirely their own fault for announcing it as early as they did and in the way that they did. So, after that initial announcement, what happens in terms of the development of Final Fantasy Versus XIII? Because they're going to be using Crystal Tools, which is not finished yet. So if that game, if the engine's not finished yet and it's being optimized specifically for 13, what is Nomura and team, like, what are they doing in this interim while they're waiting for that stuff to be finished?
World Ends With You. Remix.
So because he's kind of like locked into this project, Kingdom Hearts 3 never really initiates, right? And so they do like a bunch of smaller Kingdom Hearts projects, but him, and you have to remember that this is like the main Kingdom Hearts team working on this at the time.
Oh, that's right.
Right. So they can never properly begin Kingdom Hearts 3 as a result. And this is why Kingdom Hearts 3 ended up taking so much longer than it was supposed to. So Kingdom Hearts 3 stalls, and I would say that probably Versus goes through a ton of scope creep, right? Because you're kind of sitting around thinking about your concept a lot, and you're probably thinking about a bunch of different ideas that you can go through as you're developing it. And it seems to me that the game probably became more and more ambitious. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I actually think that the level of ambition that they were approaching Versus with was probably the thing that they needed to make Final Fantasy VII happen again, if you understand what I mean. Because that's what Square has been chasing this whole time, is how can we deliver the impact of FF7 again?
But you know what's wild? FF versus Final Fantasy 13 Versus is the only thing I've ever seen from them that maybe could have come close to Act 2 of fulfilling that promise.
Yeah, 100%.
One that they just couldn't do.
It's the only game I think since that I look at and I feel, or I felt all the same things that I felt when I looked at Final Fantasy VII for the first time.
Right.
So I think that Nomura had kind of did it again, where he made like that completely like world changing aesthetic that people would like look back on and be like, wow. And the ideas that they were coming up with were incredible. But yeah, I think that a lot of scope creep also happened between that time. And as the project got more and more ambitious and they were ready to go with it, but disastrous situations kept happening, like what was happening with A Realm Reborn and them having to shift over staff with that. And so by the time Versus is in like its prime state to be like worked on and pushed out, and bear in mind, the original release window for Versus is supposed to be like by the end of 2014.
Really?
Yeah.
They're like later than 2014. And then they get to 2012, and then they're like, the next generation is happening, and we don't think that the past generation can support this project, so we just got to wipe the slate and start over again.
So hold on. Let me step back for just a second here. So the game's announced in 2006. The Crystal Tools engine is not even complete yet. Tetsuya Nomura and his team, how many Kingdom Hearts games do they make from 2006 to whenever it is that Crystal Tools is finally, they think, ready and they can begin development in earnest on Final Fantasy Versus 13?
Yeah,
they make a lot of Kingdom Hearts games. They make a lot of
like
Kingdom
3DS,
Hearts games.
The 3DS games, and
right?
stuff, right.
Those are made by outsourced teams,
Okay.
right? So they had a team in Osaka that is sometimes called the Osaka team, which is actually now the main Kingdom Hearts developer, and so that they would go on to make Birth by Sleep and Dream Drop Distance, and then eventually Kingdom Hearts 3.
That's right.
Because this team had been stalled in progress for so long that they couldn't touch Kingdom Hearts 3. This is also why, there's kind of a debate within the Kingdom Hearts fandom on, kind of that shift, because they lost the dev team that was actually working on Kingdom Hearts games, and a brand new dev team even now is responsible for the games compared to the old team. And even the writers on it, like Nojima was responsible for Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, and you can kind of tell that he was not on anything after that, because the feel of the writing and the scenes, I feel like, shifted pretty drastically after that. So that was like just huge blockage in everything, right?
So that team then, Nomura's team that had been working on Kingdom Hearts, is not necessarily directly involved with all the spin-off titles in the interim years, but they were being pulled off to help with the development of Final Fantasy XIII and 14 1.0.
Correct.
Okay. So when was it that they were actually given space? Okay, here's your team. You're finally assembled. We're not pulling them off for other stuff. And the Crystal Tools engine is in a state where you can start using it. Now you can start making the game. Which year is this?
Like 2011, 12-ish.
Okay.
And even then, a lot of them are still kind of working on like a Realm Reborn stuff at this time. So they're still kind of...
So we have 5 years.
They have around 200 people at that point.
5 or 6 years here where they have not actually been in earnest making Final Fantasy Versus 13 at all.
Right. And so the game only gets to about a quarter finished when all this happens.
So I think that's a big misconception on the part of people who've been following this over the years. I've seen a lot of people who hurl a lot of blame at Nomura. Nomura has become, I think, kind of an easy target in a lot of people's eyes for the fall off of the Kingdom Hearts series in a lot of people's estimation, and for the development hell that was Final Fantasy Versus 13. But when you consider that they didn't even have an engine to make the game with,
I didn't realize that.
They didn't even have an engine to where they could actually start making the game. When you consider that their team was fractured in order to be pushed onto other struggling development teams because they were falling way behind, and their games ended up being either super divisive in the case of Final Fantasy XIII in terms of, fan reaction to what they made, but also Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 just being like kind of an abject failure. It's just kind of a broken game that had really damaged the reputation of Final Fantasy. Whereas, this isn't just my opinion. This is internally, developers were saying this. We're in big trouble here. Like, the reputation of our flagship series is really, really harmed. And Tetsuya Nomura was not allowed to like actually develop this thing that I think clearly he was super passionate about, that he had this was all like his brainchild, right? Like, but in his career before this, he had been working alongside Hironobu Sakaguchi in developing the story of Final Fantasy VII, right? They kind of did that together. Kingdom Hearts was something he was kind of assigned to as this, sort of collaboration with Disney. But this was going to be like his thing, something he conceived on his own, and that way he was going to be kind of the auteur creator for. And as soon as like he's given the opportunity to do that, he's actually once again pulled off to help fix a bunch of other stuff, and is not given the time or resources that he needed to actually begin making that game until, well, let's call it 5 years after the announcement.
Right. And I think one of the important things to realize about him too is that Nomura, he's not an exec. Kitase is an exec. Yoshi P is an exec. He's an actual creative. And so he has less control than all of them by a mile. Yeah. But he's also the one that gets farmed the most for his intellectual property. Yeah. And so, and when you actually read the interviews and stuff like that, he's genuinely like the most reasonable person, right? Like, for example, with Final Fantasy VII Remake, Kitase was like, I want to make this a straight action game. Yeah. And Nomura was like the one who was like, okay, no, we need to have, command RPG elements in here for the original fans and not, shift this over to something that would alienate people. But, even though he tends to actually be like the voice of reason a lot of times, people have kind of associated his name with a lot of the failures of Square Enix over the past 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
So,
which, it's not to like completely, it's not to say like, he's been perfect or something like that either, but it's to say that he became this like target for the fan base as you being like in a director role, because he's not like in an executive role like you're talking about. So people are thinking, oh, he's the one like making all the decisions on all of these things because he made Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. So it's like all these other Kingdom Hearts games, whatever failures people perceive them to have, they're his fault.
That's so interesting.
And it's just not how things actually happened.
Right.
I honestly don't know why he's still there after the way that they've treated him.
I've wondered that too.
Well, how familiar are you with what's going on currently with like Kingdom Hearts?
Very little. Like Kingdom Hearts 4? Very little.
So, have you gentlemen played Kingdom Hearts 3?
I did, and that was, I kind of swore off of Kingdom Hearts after 3. Because the way that it ends and where it goes, I kind of felt like this is never gonna end. It's never going it's never going anywhere. And so that's why I have not been following 4. I was very excited for 3, and I waited for it for many years. And I was hoping for some finality, some closure, and I didn't get that. So I'm kind of out of it. But tell me, please.
More than fair, because I have my feelings about 3 as well. But in Kingdom Hearts 3, when you get to specifically the Toy Story world, there is a fake trailer that plays for a video game, a fictional video game called Virum Rex, which is Latin for True King. And it has some incredible similarities to Final Fantasy Versus XIII.
That did not escape my notice. I noticed that immediately. I was like, this is what Tetsuya Nomura really wants to do.
Exact same design silhouette as Noctis, the main fictional character of this, Yozora. Yozora, Japanese for night sky. Noctis Lucis Kylum, light of the night sky, right? So you can see that there is a lot of parallels here. Also, the world that they're in is called Quadratum, right? Quadratum is really interesting because it means square. You can see that there's a bit of a commentary going on here.
That's funny.
Later on in Kingdom Hearts 3, you get to like this section of the game. I may not be recalling this correctly because it's been a while since I been through this section of the game, but basically it's kind of like a purgatory world where like you can talk to these disembodied souls. And one of those disembodied souls is called Nameless Star. Nameless Stella.
Of course.
Yes. And Nameless Star says everything about her has been taken away. Her name, her personality, and the one that she loves, his heart has been changed for another.
Let me guess.
Referring to how
Moon.
Noctis's
Moon.
well, yes, but also referring to how Noctis has been changed from his original intent in Versus to what they did in 15.
Wow, very cool.
So there is, and then also even at the end, there is like a secret movie that plays, and which is, you know, par for the course with Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah.
But Yozora is seen standing on top of the Tokyo Metropolitan Government Building,
right,
which is pretty significant because if you know Final Fantasy XV pretty well and Versus, you know that same building is also used as the reference for the Citadel in Insomnia.
Did not know that.
So yeah,
Wow.
so he's in a world, and I think it's also interesting because Quadratum, again, remember Quadratum means square.
Yeah.
But Quadratum is also seen as the land of the dead. So he is kind of making a connection here that Square is the land of the dead.
Wow.
And this is all the setup for Kingdom Hearts 4.
Yeah,
Mike, you look blown away.
I'm well, we're going to get into this in earnest in just a second about a lot of the sort of like underhanded comments he has made like over the years, and how obviously clearly hurt he is by how this was handled and eventually taken away from him. But before we get into that, so he's sort of waiting, like we said, for Crystal Tools to be ready, his team to actually be given back to him to start working on this game that is his baby. And in the meantime, you know, how much of like the story or like the concept for, or the outline is completed? And what were some of those original concepts that didn't actually make their way into Final Fantasy XV?
Wow. Okay. Big
Where do you
question
start?
Yeah. Okay. So this is somewhat contentious because according to Tabata, he described Versus 13 like it was just concepts. Like there was nothing there wasn't like actually like a finished story there. Whereas Nomura has basically said that the scenario was complete in 2010, and then Tatsuhisa Suzuki has basically said that he has the script for Versus, and that's Noctis's voice actor in Japanese for those who don't know. So his Japanese voice actor says he has the script for Versus, and he says he'd love to talk about it someday. So you have two different sides of the story here. I guess I don't know who is fully telling the truth. I imagine that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of those two statements, right? Where I'm sure that Tabata did have some reason for feeling like Versus wasn't fully formed. I'm sure from a game design perspective, with it only being a quarter finished, there probably was a lot of stuff that was not finished. But it does seem like Nomura had a very strong sense of direction of where he wanted to go. I'm willing to bet, knowing him, that he may not have had all of his ideas maybe kind of documented or explicitly wrote out in such a way that everyone coming on board could look at, but I'm sure that he had them in his head.
Yeah.
The same guy. Well, I don't know even, because he also says he keeps a binder full of all of his ideas. So I don't know how well he is at documenting those things. But yeah, so there's definitely a huge amount of that. And then when it comes to Final Fantasy 15, they kind of got hit with a lot of a lot of metaphorical bombs, that really offset the project. So the first big thing was that they really wanted to sell this game in all regions, because at the time, Square Enix thought the Final Fantasy brand was cooked. They were like, it's over. They were projecting that Final Fantasy XV would sell under 5 million units, which is crazy, like really low, insanely low projection, considering that 13 had sold 7. Basically, like all of them had sold, I mean, that would make it really, really low, right?
Yeah.
I think that would make it like one of the lowest selling Final Fantasies up to that point. So
Even Final Fantasy XII seems to have sold over 6 million. So on the PS2,
right. So they basically were projecting that this thing was going to not perform well at all. So they were all in a panic. And they came in and basically said, you need to do it in one game. In hindsight, it seems like, why would you do this in one game? And you did like Final Fantasy XIII, like you did a whole trilogy for that. And a lot of people would have preferred Final Fantasy VII Remake have been one game or maybe 2 games, but certainly not 3, right?
Right.
But, you have to remember, they're coming off of Lightning Returns. And that's like barely scraping by 1 million.
Yeah.
And they're looking at Final Fantasy VII Remake and they're saying, okay, this is our golden child. Final Fantasy VII can certainly do a whole trilogy. But Final Fantasy XV is risk. No one knows how this thing is going to perform. And our current projections do not look good. So you need to make this thing one game. And so they try to rework all of this into one game, while also being told, because we need to sell this in all regions to maximize our profits, to maximize the number of units this is going to sell, the Reaper worship thing isn't going to work, because there are a lot of different countries where that would violate the age rating, and it would push it into basically like our equivalent of adults only rating, which means it can't be sold at, say, another country's equivalent of like Walmart, usually.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
you mentioned this in your video, but I am not entirely clear what Reaper worship is referring to. So can you explain that?
It's kind of loosely defined, but essentially like worshiping in this specific case, like worshiping a goddess of death would be seen as like cult-like nature. And a lot of countries, especially if you're looking at like certain superstitions and stuff around death, right. It's a no-go. So most people speculate that this is most likely China, because China has a lot of rules around the portrayals of death and a lot of rules around the depictions of Reaper worship and portraying like death in any, China has like the CCP has a ton of rules around this type of thing.
Okay.
And so that was probably the main country that he's referring to. There's also countries like, I think it wouldn't have been appropriate if they were to release it in like Saudi Arabia and a lot of other countries like that. Yeah. So they would have to like not sell the game in those specific regions. And so they wanted to sell this thing everywhere. And because of that, they were like, lose the Reaper worship, which is kind of funny, right? Because that's like telling Final Fantasy VII, like, hey, yeah, you need to lose all this stuff about like the planet and corporatism.
Because they won't sell it in whatever.
Yeah.
It's like one of the predominant themes of the game. Yeah. And it was actually one of the most interesting concepts to me, that our main protagonist was kind of part of what seemed to be a death cult. Like their entire nation was sort of founded on this death cult. And it was almost like your protagonist was also kind of a villain, was almost like what they were hinting at there, right? Like it might not just be the main character is like the protagonist or hero of the story, but maybe in some ways like setting up sort of a villain origins story. Like the Omen trailer that released right before Final Fantasy XV came out sort of hinted at that a lot. Right. Was that like Noctis might actually be in the wrong here. Like he might be doing some messed up stuff.
Is this stuff all brought up in Kingsglaive, or is it? Did they get rid of it from that one too?
It's totally erased from that.
Kingsglaive. Okay, so here's the thing. It's actually one of the things that I kind of forgot to include in my video.
Yeah.
But Kingsglaive actually started its production in 2013, which,
really?
if you think about it, like, wait, we saw the Niflheim invasion of Insomnia in the trailer for 2013. So it's kind of like one of those things where did they put that trailer out knowing, yeah, that's not going to be in the game.
Oh, geez. I hate that. I hate that.
Right. Right. And the thing about that, yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
thing about that trailer is that, like, again, they're only like 1 year into development at that point. So I'm like overwhelmingly certain what happened is that they pulled Versus's character models and all the assets that they had in, and they pulled that into probably like Luminous's production environment and just said, yeah, we're going to like make a thing that looks kind of like it's like this brand new thing, but like really we're just using like all the assets, and like behind the scenes we're actually making new models and new things to like fill the gap. But we need to make this look like it is further ahead than it is so that it can build anticipation.
Hold on. Let me just clarify something for the timeline real quick. So we're talking about 2013. That 2013 trailer was the announcement that it was being shifted from Versus 13 into Final Fantasy 15, right?
I thought that was 14.
Correct.
Okay, 13. Okay.
Okay, so in 2013, we get the announcement it's no longer Versus 13. It's now going to be Final Fantasy 15. And at that point, Nomura and Tabata are like co-directors on this thing. It's not just Nomura's thing anymore. They've brought on Hajime Tabata, who was the director on Final Fantasy Type 0, which itself had sort of morphed from its original Agito 13 concept a bit as well, right?
Correct.
Okay. But before that, they had showed some more Versus 13 material at an earlier time. Was that in 2011?
Correct.
And that was is that the trailer where they're showing a lot of combat and things like that, that shows the invasion of Insomnia? And Noctis is there like fighting, and there's like a behemoth or something like that, and they're like having a battle in Insomnia, right?
Correct.
So what was the state of the development at that point when they launched that trailer in 2011? That's still projected to be a PS3 game, right?
Correct. So, I mean, according to Tabata, the game was only a quarter complete by 2012, and that's a year later, right?
Yeah.
So I think you could probably estimate that maybe it's 15 to 20-ish% complete when we're looking at it at that point, which is why if you go back and you look at that trailer, the in-game graphics are still pretty rough at that point.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't look like a finished, polished product, and that's because it's not. It's just literally everything they have that currently works or works long enough to make a shot of a trailer look convincing enough, and then compile all those together, and you get something that looks really incredible, right?
So what were the roadblocks they were hitting at that stage? Because I remember seeing not just those scenes that show like Insomnia and things like that. The scenes with like Noctis, they're like in the high-rise building with all the glass, and he's kind of speaking with Stella there. We'd seen a lot of that before, but there was also some shots in fields and like out in the open and other places as well, right?
Yeah, and so basically they felt like, or not that they felt, but rather they kept hitting limitations on the PlayStation 3 hardware for seamlessly loading in open world environments. And that was kind of the big hurdle that they couldn't overcome.
And that was due mainly to Crystal Tools being optimized for Final Fantasy XIII, which was a linear game, mostly hallways and tight spaces.
Yes.
So because of the way that engine ended up being built, they could not make Final Fantasy Versus XIII the way that Nomura had originally sort of envisioned it to be. So do they decide at this point in 2011 we need to build a new engine.
Correct.
Okay. So this is the origins of Luminous. And do they then decide we're not going to make this on the PS3 anymore?
Yeah, and that's when they were like, let's just go all in on the next gen hardware. But of course, that also means that all of those PS3 assets that had already been created are no longer going to fit the next generation environment.
Okay. So the hard decision is made. We can't make this game on Crystal Tools. We're going to miss that PS3 launch window. There's going to need to be a PS4 title, and we're going to need to build a new engine again, specifically for this game.
Right.
Is that
and make all the assets over again?
Yeah, and make all the assets over again and everything. We're basically starting from scratch. So
yes.
At that point, is that when they decide to bring Hajime Tabata on to work with Nomura, or was there a time, or is there any documentation on why they made the decision to like kind of start taking the project away from Nomura?
Right. So Nomura, he's responsible for a lot of the intellectual property in Square Enix, right? He's very, very, very much attached to Final Fantasy VII and to Kingdom Hearts. Very much so to Kingdom Hearts. He is the father of that series. And so they're really needing him for both of those projects. And it's seen as though, okay, maybe we can have this co-director come in and there can be a transition of power, right? So Nomura can set up his vision, make sure everything is running the way he wants things to go, and then the co-director can continue to carry it out while he's working on these projects that people have been anticipating for a really long time and they need to get out of the door, right? So they transition that power onto Tabata so he can fulfill basically the rest of his mission, the rest of his vision, while Nomura works on the things that are specific to him.
Which are Kingdom Hearts 3 and Final Fantasy VII Remake, which they're getting ready to start working on.
Correct.
I can't imagine how frustrating that would be to have like finally been given a project that can be yours. You're stalled for years because the company does not have their own stuff together in terms of giving you a working engine that can support the game that you have, I'm certain, pitched to them and that has been approved.
Right.
Then once you finally get to a stage where like they're going to start giving you those foundations and resources, they say, actually, we want you to make Final Fantasy VII Remake and Kingdom Hearts 3, not this thing anymore. Obviously, we have no idea how that conversation went or whatever, but it's clear through comments that he has made in the years since then that he's not happy about it, but also not only that he's not happy about it, he's not even allowed to talk about it. Can you touch on that real quick?
Okay. So he was doing a live stream for Dissidia Inti, which for those not familiar was like a Final Fantasy fighting game. And in that game, Noctis was going to have what they call the otherworldly garb. So this was basically his Final Fantasy Versus XIII outfit was going to come to this game as an alternative costume for him. And basically during that stream, Kuji Ryoka, who I want to say was actually like someone who had worked on Final Fantasy XV as well. I think he was actually one of the DLC directors. I may be misremembering that, but he was like, "Oh yeah, this costume was from Versus XIII," and Nomura was like, "You can say that? You can say Versus XIII? You can say it, right?" So they wouldn't even let him talk about it. And he basically said, one day, I really need to write a book about everything that happened during that time period. And so he definitely has, he's definitely been censored as far as what he can say regarding the topic because it's been sensitive. And I guess for whatever reason, Square Enix eventually opened that back up after they deemed it was no longer, damaging for them, for people to learn more about what that project was.
My only question remains here: why did he stay? Like, why did he stay at Square Enix through all of this? Why did he go on to continue working on these projects that they put him on when he's clearly like this resentful about it? I wish I could ask him that at some point. I'm sure he wouldn't answer it today while he's still employed there. But it's something that I do eventually hope that he will write a book about and sort of share like what was the, because, you know, Yasumi Matsuno left, Hironobu Sakaguchi left, all these other guys that had internal sort of strife with the executive leadership at Square Enix. They left pretty quickly. Like once those things came to an end.
Tetsuya Takahashi as well, yeah.
Tetsuya Takahashi left, and Hajime Tabata, who took over this project.
It didn't take him long.
They finished this game, and then we'll get into that disaster in a minute. He left. So what kept him there is a question that is, I think, going to plague me for years to come until he decides he wants to talk about it.
Well, especially because he does like, I don't know if the word is freelance. I don't know if that's the right word, but he does work for other video games from other companies as well. Like, I think there was a Monolith Soft game that he did designs for that I believe
Xenoblade 2.
Oh, it was the Xenoblade. That was it. And he designed like one of the characters and outfits and weapons and stuff. Or I can't remember exactly what it was, but he lends his talents to other companies. It would almost be as if he could just be his own third-party production studio. It would not be difficult. He is in demand, even outside of Square.
Yeah, it's crazy because I think that if he wanted to leave, there are so many companies that would have cut him a check, especially
a big check.
Yeah. Yes, I mean he would have had a blank check from definitely from Sony. I feel like they would have given him one.
Sony,
Yeah, like Microsoft, he could have gotten a blank check from a lot of different people. I can only speculate what keeps him there is his determination to carry out Kingdom Hearts and to fulfill the rest of that. And also creative control over things like Final Fantasy VII Remake, maybe. But like, I think that maybe that those are the things that actually keep him there and his own attachment to his IP. But me personally, considering the things that he's said and done, it's very difficult for me to imagine why he's still there. But I do think it is pretty hilarious in the case of Kingdom Hearts that he is basically spending Square's own money to make a commentary about Square.
Funny,
like how he feels about the management there and all the things that have happened to him, which I mean, you know, and maybe I'm like not recalling this correctly, but I want to say even that's kind of what Matsuno used for inspiration for Final Fantasy Tactics even.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, interesting.
Is that correct?
That's totally correct. It was not that long ago. I think it might have been last year that he sent a tweet out that said something like a big piece of the motivation behind like the political intrigue in Final Fantasy Tactics was me coming into Square Enix after leaving the Ogre Battle team and seeing like the hierarchy that existed there. And that was like a big sort of like influence in how he designed the politics and of that game. So
Tetsuya Takahashi said something similar too. He's like the final boss of a game is basically like your own boss in the company. He kind of equated that.
Right. And then even when Tabata left, he was like, I feel like I can't make the kind of games I want here because I'm butting heads with the president. And so you have all of these really brilliant creatives over the years that are leaving and saying like, yeah, I can't do the things I want and need to do at this company anymore because of the executives and the way the higher up structure works. And so it's really unfortunate that Square has continued to bleed some of the best talent of our generation over the years just because of how this corporate structure works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay. So this doesn't happen immediately. It's sort of like Tabata comes in as a co-director and they're supposed to be working on it together. But slowly but surely, he's once again pulled away to go work on Kingdom Hearts 3, to go work on Final Fantasy VII Remake and other things. And Tabata becomes the sole director of this thing. At what point does that happen? And why is that decision made? And then what does Tabata decide to do to fix this mess of a situation and get this thing going?
So the transition itself begins almost immediately, right? But at this point, I believe they're not quite hit with the realities of having to remove the Reaper worship and all this other things and compress it into one game. And we kind of know that because in 2013, Nomura, he's doing like all of these interviews, and this is when he's saying that this is going to be a multi-game epic, and basically everything from Versus 13 is carrying over. And then the next year following, Tabata is like, yeah, none of that's happening. Right? So 2013, Nomura goes out to the public and he's like, this is still Versus. It's going to be a multi-game epic and we're doing all of this other stuff. And then the next year, he's like, yeah, none of that's happening. And behind the scenes, I think that, Nomura is already kind of being like, he's already like losing authority on it and kind of being pushed off, right? Because again, Kingsglaive is greenlit in 2013. So they immediately say the invasion of Insomnia is no longer going to be a thing. We can't do that. And this is all because, again, 2016 mandate. They have to get a game out by the end of that year, no matter what the cost.
And this is what, 2013 at this point? So they have 3 years? 3 years to get this thing finished.
Right. And so at that point in time, they were like, well, we've already shown all these trailers and all these concepts to players. So we feel like we're locked in. We have to deliver these elements. Otherwise, people are going to be disappointed, which is probably a fairly true estimation, right? So they can't not have those things. And at this point, they begin thinking about how they can offload those things into different projects that would allow them to still have those parts of the story be there, but allow them to cut enough from the game to basically finish something in time for the release in 2016
Okay, so
I have something that I can add here. I just looked up Square Enix's. They're a public company, right? So they have to publish earnings reports every quarter. But at the end of fiscal year 2013, Square Enix reported an operating loss for the first time since 2003, which was when they merged Square Enix and Square and Enix merged. The net loss was 13 billion yen, which, anyways, lots of money, millions of dollars, I guess. But they actually ended the year 2013 on a net loss, not a profit, for the first time in 10 years. I gotta say, like, that would have the expected results of what we're talking about here. All of a sudden, the scope kind of narrows, and hey, we can't do your thing anymore, dude. I'm sorry.
Yeah, like we need a game, right? That becomes the mentality.
Yeah,
exactly. So they start compressing everything down, and
so
they
one
had
question though. So of that that big financial loss reported in the fiscal year 2013, a lot of that's going to be contributed to Final Fantasy XIV 1.0, right?
That's not what is said here. This says poor performance. That would be 2012. That would be
okay. So Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 was 2012.
Yeah, but they did not have a net loss for 2012. Their first net loss was 2013, and then by 2014 they had a net profit.
Would that have been when Final Fantasy XIII Lightning Returns came out?
I don't know.
I think that was also 2012, right?
Yeah, it was like December 2012 in Japan, I want to say, and then maybe it was that following year too.
Yeah, this says 2013.
So I'm trying to think.
2013 for
Versus 13 or for Lightning
Returns, and then 2014 in America, actually.
So who knows? Okay, so but anyways, they're struggling is the point. And this contributes to what you were talking about earlier with the whole brand is damaged, right? They're already feeling like we're in big trouble. The Final Fantasy brand is not trusted right now. This is why they projected 5 million units sold for Final Fantasy XV. This is also why they would have not accepted a game that from the beginning entailed multiple sequels, right?
Right.
So can you talk about that for a second? How large was the scope of the project originally? And what sources do you have that suggest that?
I'd like to give a shout out to Acid Rain Comics, who is nice enough to speak to me. He data mines and reverse engineers the game, and he does a lot of his work on YouTube and shows off some of the stuff that he's discovered. And some of the stuff he was telling me was just it was like absolutely mind-blowing. It would just I can't even describe like how frustrated and depressed I felt like all over again. But by his estimations, and I also agree with this too, I think that the Versus 13 1, let's just call it, would have probably been the invasion of Insomnia all the way through to about the Leviathan fight, and things would probably cap off after about there. So we think that that's what that was. And then the subsequent sequels would probably be exploring Accordo and Niflheim, right? So, and then also like Tenebrae and those areas, right? The thing is, and this is also something that he had kind of discovered through his data mining, was that the world map had changed multiple times. And even now, when you boundary break and you go out into the game's world map, geometry is incredibly detailed for miles. Basically, they really did plan on trying to make the entire game essentially open world. Like they really did. And, he had a lot of evidence that essentially Lucis was a lot smaller originally, and they were going to try to like save a lot of the quests and content for the other continents. And then, one thing happened or another. You could probably speculate that as they got closer to the deadline, it was like, yeah, that's not going to work. So they take all of that back and then try to fit it within the main continent. And that's essentially my understanding of how he explained it. So basically every single thing you can point to in this game is either a result of the fact that one, Versus's core themes had to be taken out, or two, the fact that they were given an absurdly short time to deliver a game that was going to have 10 years worth of anticipation built on it, and 10 years of concepts and all sorts of other things being projected onto a project that was actually given an unbelievably short amount of time, given the scope of what it wanted to do.
Wow.
In hindsight, they should not have let people know that this was Versus 13. They should have just said, that project scrapped, this is a brand new game, because that's what it ended up being. That would have tempered people's expectations a little.
Part of me does think that perhaps it would have been better to just cancel Versus, right? Yeah. Because at the very least, what you could have done is revisit the game at another point and say, hey, okay, we're going to bring that back. We're going to reboot that and bring it to fruition. But this sort of locked them into those expectations. And I can understand from a corporate management POV why they'd want to do that, because the hype behind this game was insane, right? Like there was something really tangible that you could build on, versus if they started over, they would be, working their way back up from ground zero to try to build something that captivated people. So, and then also too, with the brand so damaged, like, holy crap, 13's controversial launch, 14 1.0. Yeah. They hypothetically cancel Versus in this scenario. And then, it's like, holy crap, like Final Fantasy looks so cooked. Like it looks so bad for them to do that. And then, so the obvious solution to them, and I can really understand it given what they had at the time, was to say, hey, we got to get out something that at the very least looks like it's Versus.
That looks like it, that has some of the aesthetic, that has some of the elements people seemed to be excited for, but is reworked into something that can work as a standalone game. And any of the elements that we showed off before that we know we can't get in there, we will try to put out as mixed media material, such as
the anime,
the anime and the Kingsglaive movie, and there was another game released too. It's kind of like a pixelated game. What was that?
Oh yeah. That's King's Story or something, right? King.
Yeah, King's Story. Yeah, I believe. I can't remember. Yeah,
I remember that.
Anyway, so they released a whole bunch of other stuff to try to like fill in the gaps because they knew they weren't going to be able to do the Insomnia invasion in the game. They knew there were several other stories that were told in the anime and like background for the characters that weren't going to make it into the game that they hoped they could fill in with those. And you mentioned this in your video, but those did work really well as marketing material for the game. I remember leading up to the release, we did a big like 24-hour live stream before the game came out where we watched the movie, we watched all the anime, basically went over all that material before the game launched. It certainly did a lot to like get people excited, get people filled in a little bit on what this world was all about. And
we did a whole analysis on the song Stand By Me.
Yeah, that's true.
That's awesome.
Like, what does it mean? Who wrote it? Where does it come from? Or what hints does it have about the game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in reality, and I thought this was interesting too. In your video, you talked about how this is actually the shortest mainline series and game in the mainline series in terms of like the length of its story of any Final Fantasy game. It can be beat, what you said, in like 15 hours or so?
Yeah.
If you buckle down.
It's super short. Yeah, it's incredibly short.
And that's all the reflection of the fact that the game was not developed for 10 years. The game was really developed for 3 years. And in conjunction with its development, they were making an engine for it at the same time. And so you can only imagine how much content had to be trimmed down and cut due to just total necessity of making something that isn't a complete broken mess within 3 years and by a deadline that had been set by executives above. And I feel really bad for Hajime Tabata as well. You could see it in his face, like, as the project went on, just like how tired he was, how like absolutely exhausted and drained, and how hard he was working and doing everything within his power to like make this thing work, and was, trying to be transparent with the audience about something that they hadn't been talking about and hadn't been transparent about in the past. He saw that as being a problem and tried to address that and tried to take player feedback and was doing his absolute best to like make something great under constraints that were just, I imagine, unbearable. And the fact that the game is what it is a miracle. It's a miracle that it was delivered even in the state that it was. And beyond that, they went through so much effort to try to add more in patches afterwards and in DLC that came afterwards. But
I want to talk about that.
Okay.
Your 15-hour estimate, is that Royal Edition or is that like base?
That's Royal Edition.
Ah, man.
That's Royal Edition.
Oh,
I beeline the game and I was like, dang, this thing really is that short. And that's with the brand new dungeon. That's
the new dungeon and all the DLC stuff, all the extra stories, or is that just
if you add the DLC stories, it would be different. If you add the DLC, because they're all between like 2 and 4 hours, so you'd get closer to 20-ish hours. But the actual core experience,
Oh man. All right.
Yeah. So, it's clear that all of that was done judiciously. by a director who's trying to manage all of this and just had to make a lot of those hard choices and became the fall guy for this whole thing in the end. When it was all said and done, he seemed to be, am I stating this correctly, forced out? Or was this a...
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so.
So why do you think that?
This is something I didn't mention in my video, but it's highly speculative. But like speculative, I mean. But like, so Crisis Core Reunion came out, right? Which is like a remakester of Crisis Core, right?
Yeah.
More so on the side of remaster, because it's still running on like the PSP code and everything else like that. But essentially, on the credits of that game, they removed his director credit.
Wow.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
No way. Oh my God.
And I didn't want to include that because I'm thinking like,
What?
you know, did they do that because, I don't know, he left and he wasn't like really a part of the remaster? And so like, I can't like really speak with certainty with that. But considering he was forced out and they canceled all the stuff he was working on, and then, I mean, except for like Forspoken, which also shifted into an entirely different game, by the way, after he left, because that game was not going to be like what it was ever. And some of the writers who worked on it also commented like, hey, everything we wrote for Forspoken is like literally not in there.
Wow.
So yeah. So something happened with him and Yosuke Matsuda, and I think he was forced out.
Well, you had a
100%.
quote in your video, didn't you, where he said something about having philosophical differences with the president of Square Enix at the time.
I think Tabata's a businessman, obviously, and you have to phrase these things amicably because you can't really talk bad about your previous employer, obviously. Not good for business. But, you know, when you look at that, when you look at, I even think him being removed from the credits of Crisis Core Reunion even was kind of like weird to me. There is a way, I think, to view like the original PSP credits in the game, but I just find it weird that like on the credits that players actually see for the most part, unless they go into like a separate submenu, his name is not there. And people had kind of called attention to that like when the game had first came out. And so, you know, I can't like directly attribute that as like a reason. And so I didn't put that in the video. But part of me just gets the feeling that it is related to kind of like the sentiment that things were left off on with him in the company. So
yeah,
again, I'm not saying that that's a fact of why, but I feel that might be.
Yeah, I think that that's a fair sort of, you know, assumption to make. And it's a sort of just a common thread that I see with Square Enix in sort of the modern time. And by modern time, I'm not just talking about like the last 5 to 10 years. I'm talking about from essentially when Squaresoft became Square Enix. It seems to me that this company goes public, right? They try to corporatize, and a lot of the way that it has been managed from that point has just been so poor. From just a lack of understanding from the top side down of like what goes into making games and how complicated they were becoming and how fast that was happening. And the types of deadlines they set, the decisions they make on where resources need to be, how they assign, you know, devs to what project, and then the burden that puts on ongoing projects. The whole thing was so badly mismanaged from the executive side that they nearly drove Final Fantasy into the ground within a period of 10 years, maybe even less than that, from the time that Squaresoft became Square Enix. And Hajime Tabata pulling off what he did ended up making Final Fantasy 15 a pretty tremendous success, right? Like
Right.
the game sold how many units? Is it 10 million plus at this point?
10 million's the last update we got. Yeah.
Okay, but
It's pretty good.
We need to talk about that though. That's why are we having this discussion about a game that sold over 10 million copies right now? Because I actually I have two minds of this. One of my thoughts is very cynical and bad, and I shouldn't think this way, but I kind of do. This game this game was highly successful.
Yeah.
That is not good. Like a management that does this should not be rewarded. Maybe that's what I'm trying to. That's one.
Right.
The other thought. Well, how did they make this successful? How did they make this a thing that let's do that again? Right.
They did the number one thing that you need to succeed in today's market, I think, which is you need a lot of content and you need it coming out at a very frequent cadence. And so having a movie, an anime, DLC, they were going to implement modding support, which, by the way, I think if they implemented that, they actually were able to get out the modding tools that they were promised, I think that they would have hit 12 or 15 million, because I think the user generated content would have had a similar effect that we see in games like Skyrim,
Well,
you
like
know
what people would
games.
You know what people would have done? They would have made Final Fantasy Versus XIII. That's what
they
the modders
yes.
would have done.
They would have. And so having that user generated content would have done it. But also, again, like the DLC, for example, kept Final Fantasy 15 being talked about. Cyberpunk, for example. Now, personally, I actually really love Cyberpunk. And I think now, especially after the 2.0 update in Phantom Liberty, Cyberpunk is like a phenomenal game to me now. But I think there is, whenever you try to fix the game and people see that you're actually trying, this is a similar situation with No Man's Sky and Final Fantasy XIV.
Right.
People they want to see if you can really do it, if you can actually like really turn it around. And I think that through a combination of that and sales, and then people hearing like, oh, I heard it's much better than launch, and they go and check it out, and like, oh, it's only $30 now. Okay, I'll purchase it and see what happens, right?
But
and then I hear like all these other updates are coming.
Its first month sales were 6 million. Like they hit their target in the first month.
Right? Yeah.
That's before all of this. I like.
Yes.
They threw
Versus
enough
hype, though,
money
too,
at
right?
it to force it to be a success. And I just feel weird about that. that. I don't like that that's a thing that's possible to be done. But at the same time, I don't know, maybe the game's just not as bad as it sounds, as people have been kind of, as the reviews suggest.
Well, let's put it this way. In order for...
Or as our conversation suggests.
Well, I want to put that to bed, first of all. I don't even dislike this game as it was launched. I haven't even played like the new content for the game. I played the game at launch and beat it and never touched it again. And that would suggest that I didn't like it. That is not the case. I liked the game like well enough, but I was just disappointed as someone who had wanted Final Fantasy Versus XIII for so long, and what the game ended up being was not that. But the game itself is not like a horrible game. I've tried to state this as many times as possible, even though people don't seem to want to listen. There is not one mainline Final Fantasy game outside of 14 1.0 that I would consider a bad game. They are all good games. They are all very polished games. They are all clearly made with a lot of passion and love. The differences and opinions about which ones are excellent and which ones are less so all come down to Square Enix's mismanagement of the brand and the expectations of the brand, and the fact that each of these games kind of garner different fan bases because they play so differently from each other. And so there's all this...
Can you say they mismanaged the brand when the game sold over 10 million copies?
So this is what I'm getting to.
Right.
Because Final Fantasy XVI did not sell like that.
Oh, really?
So
I
when
don't
you
know.
when
Yeah.
you take that into account, yes, you can have something be a major success. That
16 sales are really bad. Oh,
Yeah.
that's sad.
So-
that kind of hurts my heart. Well, but which is the better game, though? I actually honestly couldn't
this
tell
is
you.
this is
I
my
didn't-
point. This is my point. The way that they marketed Final Fantasy 15 is what led to that initial buy-in, and then what Ryan is saying, the continual content and support afterwards is what kept it relevant for a long time and
to
gave
sell
it a long
millions
tail.
more.
But the Omen trailer, great one is bringing
Yeah.
that up here in the comments. I brought it up earlier. That trailer was absolutely outstanding. It is
Yeah, it
the
was.
best piece of Final Fantasy 15 related content that has ever been released.
Yeah, and it had Nomura written all over it.
Yes,
It tried to like recapture his like energy.
it felt like what Final Fantasy Versus XIII was going for. And it had almost nothing to do with what Final Fantasy 15 actually was.
It's so true.
Yeah.
It's like unbelievable to me that they marketed
Right.
the story of Final Fantasy 15 with the Omen trailer, which I mean, it's a totally different story, that trailer. I don't know if they tried to play that off as at the end of the trailer you see Noctis's father, and it's almost like it's a vision he's seeing, like something he's trying to avoid or something like that. And so they're playing it off like, oh, this is like a possible future that like he's trying to like navigate and like change. And so like he's going to send Noctis off over here before the invasion happens to like avoid this future. I don't know if that was their thought. And in doing so, trying to pay tribute to the Versus 13 concept. But what that did was establish an expectation in people like me. Man, the spirit of Versus 13 is still here. I can't wait.
Right.
And it wasn't.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think that a lot of the mega fan base, their trust was damaged by the final product of Final Fantasy 15. Again, I'm not saying it's a bad game. I actually kind of like the game for what it is. It's just not what people were expecting.
Gotcha.
So, but that initial buy-in, and then like Ryan is saying, like, you know, a lot of content being supported afterwards, there's a lot of people who bought this. You don't get to 10 million sales with just like the baseline mega Final Fantasy fans. Like that's a lot of people who are like, I've never played a Final Fantasy game before. Let me try this out. Again, a whole new fan base gets born by millions and millions of people trying this out and buying it. And Square Enix does a lot of sales and things like that all the time to promote their stuff.
Right.
So they're playing this as the first thing they've ever encountered in terms of Final Fantasy. They had no expectation. They have no idea what Final Fantasy Versus 13 is. And a lot of the game's success is due to that buy-in from that crowd. But then those people who liked this thing, Final Fantasy 16 comes out and it's a completely different kind of game.
This is Square's like persistent problem.
Yeah, right. And then people like lose the traction, you know? I guess like a really fitting example would be, say, if we look at the two recent Zelda games, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I don't know if Tears of the Kingdom would have sold as well if it was just a completely removed thing from what Breath of the Wild was entirely, right? I think Zelda in general has been fairly good about maintaining a balance of like, this is very new, but it's also the thing that you know. I think Final Fantasy also used to be like really brilliant about that balance. And then it kind of shifted away from that, right? And so, like, I mean, for whatever reason you can attribute it to, a lot of people, they bought into kind of the open world camping vibes of Final Fantasy 15, and then that same audience did not show up in the same way for the next subsequent game. So
I just want to emphasize, while we're doing postmortems and what went wrong, the boardroom is celebrating with confetti and champagne. I just want to like just impress that on your minds and just something to think about.
But that does come back to bite them a little bit, because
I agree.
You had this dangerous period where they're like all concerned that the brand is like in dire straits.
Yeah.
But it is resurrected by the success of A Realm Reborn and subsequent expansions of Final Fantasy XIV, which garnered a bunch of trust again, and Final Fantasy XV, which did not garner the trust, but that did have the financial success.
Right.
But the fact that the trust was still hurt led to the adoption for Final Fantasy XVI being much lower at launch. Now, I remembered the thing I wanted to talk about in terms of the marketing for 15 and why it had a really great initial launch. They were marketing this, remember, as a Final Fantasy for old fans and new. You remember that?
Oh, yes, I do remember that, yeah.
They were marketing this as, we have heard the criticisms.
Oh, and you're Ryan, you mentioned Sakaguchi
yes.
coming on stage and like Final Fantasy's back. That was a big deal. Oh man.
That was really reassuring at the time.
It was.
Everyone's thought was Final Fantasy's so cooked. I'm so done with the thing. And so to have the father come out and say, no, it's back. I've seen it. They're doing great things. This is
dude. What if they just showed him the trailer for Versus 13 and that's all that he saw?
And it's like, oh yeah, it looks great. That's awesome.
Back.
So they went through great lengths in the build up to the release of that game to try to reestablish that trust. No, guys, we understand. Even Sakaguchi is back to tell you it's all is well again. The brand is back up to the expectations that you expect from us. Yeah. You can trust us. This one is going to deliver.
So 16 didn't have nearly that amount of support and marketing.
No.
No, it had stuff, but I don't think most of it was as well aligned, let's say, as Final Fantasy 15. Like they spent a lot of money making a live action trailer for Final Fantasy 16. I don't know if you guys ever seen it.
No, really?
I haven't seen it either.
I didn't know they did that.
I would not know this existed if I was not at the Final Fantasy 16 launch party.
That's right.
I don't think it would have ever came across like, but they spent what I imagine millions of dollars because it's actually a very well directed live action trailer.
Jeez.
That probably convinced a grand total of like one guy maybe to go and buy Final Fantasy 16. Like if the trailers and all the other media didn't convince other people to go buy that game. And so they spent like money on stuff like that. And I just don't think that really led to any conversion. Whereas I do think, actually, I know when Kingsglaive came out, I lived near like one of the places where that was actually having like the limited airing in like a theater. And I brought my friends who don't even play Final Fantasy. I'm like, dude, we're going to go watch the new Final Fantasy movie together. And I did that like 2 or 3 different times, by the way.
Wow.
I like went and was like, I want to watch it again. I want new people to come with me.
That was a cool movie. It was cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. And so I was actually like, I was kind of like acting as marketing for them, right? As a fan, but that's what you want. That's what you want, is that you want your fans to be so enthusiastic about it that they're telling their friends.
Yeah.
And then this comes to the problem that we have now where, with Final Fantasy 16, for example, let's say half of people are like really enthusiastic about Final Fantasy 16 and they are telling their friends. And then the other half of those people, let's just say, maybe it's not half and half, but let's just go with me here. Yeah. But those other fans are like, dude, this shit sucks.
Yeah.
They're like, I don't like it. I don't like it. And that kind of undermines the people that are saying it's good, because at that point, you're arriving at a divisive reception, right? A mixed reception, instead of this overwhelming outcry from the core fan base. So they've kind of lost that because they've lost a kind of unified fan base by making so many different types of games that appeal to so many different types of people. Whatever they put out is inherently going to be divisive almost.
Yeah. It really boils down to this for me. People debate, argue, try to point fingers, blame different creators. But it really, for me, all comes down to when Squaresoft went public, merged with Enix, became a corporate entity, almost all of the decisions in terms of the management of Final Fantasy as a brand from the corporate executive side have been terrible and have led to whatever problems the series has found itself in. And I know a lot of people, they kind of bark back and they don't like when you talk negatively about it because a lot of these games, despite being divisive, they really resonated with a strong group of people.
Right.
And so what I want to emphasize here is that this is not us, just stating our opinion based on which Final Fantasy game we liked or didn't like, like throwing stones. These are executives and creatives, developers inside the company. People like Yoichi Wada, not Yoichi Wada,
Yosuke Matsuda, maybe.
But also Yoshi P. What's his actual name though? It's
Naoki Yoshida.
Naoki Yoshida. Thank you.
Naoki, that's it. Yeah.
He has been really outspoken about how badly managed Square Enix has been. You read statements from Nomura that are kind of underhanded. He's not directly saying anything, but I'm not allowed. Are we allowed to talk about this? Hajime Tabata and the way that all went down. It's clear that the corporate entity has badly managed this, and that the only reason Final Fantasy has survived is because of two things. One, the incredible Herculean effort on the parts of people like Yoshi P and Hajime Tabata, despite whether you agree with the choices they made.
Right.
Given the constraints they were working under, and Tetsuya Nomura as well, the constraints that were put on them by upper management, by executive corporate types, they carried that load. Many of the developers working under them work themselves to death to try to make something great that will resonate with people, despite those people above them putting every hurdle in their way.
Right.
That on top of the strength that the brand had to begin with. Final Fantasy meant so much to so many people before all of this merger happened that those experiences from the 1990s have carried longtime fans for so long, hoping that they can capture that again, that they keep giving it chance after chance after chance.
That's how good those old games were.
That's how good they were.
Right.
That's how good they were.
Right? There are some people that have not liked a game from this series for 20 years and are still involved with watching Final Fantasy content and still really engaged with the games that they played as kids. That is a testament to what the brand meant to people growing up with it.
The brand was so strong that even the corporate morons doing all of these stupid things for all of these years have not been able to break it. That's what Final Fantasy means to people. And that's how badly people are willing to keep giving it an opportunity to get back to them. And the fact that they have acknowledged that even in their marketing with things like, this is a Final Fantasy for the old fans and the new. Those taglines are inherently admitting, we have been making mistakes. We get it. Try this one. The fact that they had that huge financial, or reported those huge financial losses in 2013, the fact that corporate management has been handed over or turned over as many times as it has. The fact that they even recently have had, I know that you reported on this, Ryan, but the financial reports that came out that showed the profit margins that they were operating on, which are so far below what is what is acceptable or sustainable for any corporation of that size, shows that they continue to struggle in terms of the business side of Square Enix. This has nothing to do with the creatives or like the quality of the games or anything like that.
Yeah.
This is the fact that the business side of things is really making it hard for the creatives to make the kinds of games that built the brand to the strength that it was at originally. And they keep getting in the way. And that is the story behind, to me, what happened with Final Fantasy Versus XIII and why it turned into what it did. It is not Hajime Tabata's fault. It is not Tetsuya Nomura's fault. It is not any of the people who were passionately on the front lines, in the weeds, putting in hours and hours and hours, way over time, crunching for years to try to make something that we would love. It's not their fault. It is and has been the executive management's fault.
The video where Tabata announces the delay for like Final Fantasy 15, you just see the look in the man's eyes where he is so defeated. He's so tired. He's put so many hours into this. And he's like, I have to get up here and announce this, and people are going to hate me, even though I'm trying my hardest to make something like for you, you know?
Yes.
I have to take back when I mentioned before that 6 years and no alpha build is unacceptable. I framed that as though it was Nomura's fault. This discussion has helped me see the error of my ways. So I take it back. I take it back. This was not, especially if the engine's not there, you can't make the game. I think some of this confusion comes from the word director, that in a movie, a director and their role and the amount of control they have over what happens is different. And people kind of translate that over to a video game director, which is different. And it's not the same thing, right?
Yes.
And so sometimes people think, oh, you've been making George Lucas has been making a movie for 5 years. It's totally his fault that it's not out yet, right? That maybe has a little more merit, is my point. Then, which George Lucas, whatever. But then saying Nomura was the director of a game that was being produced by a large corporation without an engine, and that it's his fault. So the word, sometimes I think people maybe misunderstand the difference between a film director and a game director. That game directors don't have as much control as you would think.
Well, kind of wrap up here at this point, because I think we've touched on just about everything, but I wanted to throw one more opportunity to you to talk about anything that maybe you didn't have a chance to go over in the video that you thought was interesting or important to the story.
Oh, boy. Let me think for a second. I think that actually, like, one of the things that I didn't like really get to go into as much depth with was Luna Freya and how they did have every intent on making her a guest party member. And in fact, there's a mod menu that you can download that will actually kind of like re-enable what they had going on. And it's very funny because she'll just follow you around. And probably the funniest thing about this is that whenever you go into battle, her hair will like fall down out of the braid. And then when you get out of the battle, it'll go back up. And I don't know why that happens, but like most of her combat stuff is not ready. Like occasionally she'll do like a attack animation. So because there was an interview previously where they said that Luna Freya will be a guest party member. So again, that was another one of the promises that they had kind of made that they had every intent on fulfilling, and then it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
And that was good. They were gonna try to make episode Luna Freya, and then that got canceled again.
Oh my gosh.
And it's just it's just really unfortunate. I think probably Square Enix's biggest mistake in all of this was canceling Dawn of the Future.
Yeah. That
second season pass of DLC, because I think that when you look at like CD Projekt Red and what they've done with Cyberpunk, again, that's parallel for this. I think they've really turned around the perception that they had when that game launched to how people feel about it now. And they saw how important it was to the brand and the perception of their games and to that IP if they wanted to continue it, that they needed to reestablish that consumer trust, right? And I think it's also really crazy too that they could cancel that DLC. And in the meantime, that same year, 2019, they were about to start marketing Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1.
Right.
Right. So they're trying, like, on one hand, they're saying, hey, if this doesn't do like what we want it to do, then we'll just cancel it. But also we want you to buy into this multi-game series that maybe if we don't like how things are going, we'll just cancel it. Right.
It's crazy.
And I imagine that with the sales of Rebirth not being the way that they wanted to, I'm sure that there are some execs that were like, we should just pull out a Part 3.
That would be
I'm glad
such a disaster. I can't even
could you imagine
what would happen if
could
they
you
did
imagine
that.
like, yeah, you'd have to like shut the whole company down.
Seriously, at that point, might as well.
Right. And I there's no way that Part 3 is going to sell more than Rebirth, right?
No.
Because
so.
yeah, right. It's always diminishing returns on each release. So I'm sure that they probably are not going to be satisfied with whatever Part 3 does as well. But the damage to the Square and Final Fantasy brand is probably so tremendous that they can't afford to cut budget or underfund Part 3 in any way. Yeah. So they're probably locked in, and they probably are not too happy about that.
This is a little bit of a side tangent. There's something else I want to say before we wrap up, but how has the Switch 2 release of Final Fantasy VII Remake boosted sales and so forth? Is there any info on that? I haven't looked into any of this in years.
Okay, so only Remake is out. Rebirth comes out in June. The initial launch of Remake seems to have done pretty decently, but it wasn't like a 10 million plus seller. It was 7 million.
Okay.
Which is basically par for the course with all the games post 10. They usually sell around that 7 million units, 12, 13, then 15 spiked up to 10, and then back down to 7. But just like with 10-2 and just like with 13-2 and Lightning Returns, a Final Fantasy sequel tends to sell half of like whatever its original did. And you can maybe speculate on why. I always assume that maybe it's just because, the sequels to Final Fantasy don't tend to be as ambitious as the first game.
Sure.
And so usually, and narratively, there's always a huge disconnect between the first title and the second title. So I thought okay.
That's not the case with Rebirth, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, this is the first time that they're actually making something that is intended to be better in every way. And I would say the consensus on that generally is that it is a better game. But it still didn't manage to push through that barrier that Final Fantasy typically has with whatever follow-up they make. It tends to drop off pretty significantly from the first thing that came out.
And do you think that was in large part to do with the PlayStation 5 exclusivity?
It's really hard to say. The Switch version of the game seems to have done pretty decently.
Yeah.
The physical versions of it sold out, but you can always attribute that to how many copies they printed. They seem to be pushing it really hard. It's hard to say how that's contributed to the overall sales because they haven't announced what the new sales numbers are after that. But I imagine it's past 8 million by now, maybe closer to 9. So I wouldn't actually be surprised if Remake Part 1 over the course of its lifetime ended up making it to 10 million.
Yeah, sure.
It's the sequels that are kind of the problem there.
But Rebirth is going to come to the Switch too, eventually.
Yes, the whole trilogy.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Stepping back from FS7R stuff, there's a lot of things that we did not cover in this episode that you cover in your video. And I kind of tried to do that on purpose because I want people to go watch your video because it's freaking great. But one thing that I wanted to make a point on to put an exclamation on my point about mismanagement within Square Enix. You talked about that stream they did where they announced the cancellation of most of the DLC for the second wave. Where only the Arden episode came out, but they got rid of Luna Freya, Aranea, and what was the other one? Was it? It
was episode Noctis, actually.
Noctis. It was Noctis. That's right.
Yeah.
They made this an event They made this a live stream. They marketed a live stream. Hey, we're going to go live to give you updates and new information on Final Fantasy XV content. People came into that expecting to be filled in on progress and release dates of all of this second wave of stuff. And they made an event out of announcing they're canceling most of it. Yeah. I can't think of a dumber thing. That's a press release. That's the job of a press release. You put out a press release, unfortunately, and a statement, unfortunately, these things are canceled, and, but episode art is still coming out on this date. That's a press release.
It's highly... I believe that it was not intended for all of that to happen. Because Tabata, I think as late as September, was talking about the content that they had planned for the second season pass. And then we get to November and we find out that at the end of October, he left the company.
So
that doesn't add up to me.
What would the only way that this would make sense to me is if they made the decision literally days before the live stream was going to happen. And
I think that's what happened. 100%.
All of a sudden, they have a live stream planned, but the decision to change all of this was days before. We've decided to cut. I should have brought this up when Kaysen was asking about, well, how can you talk about this not being a huge success if it's a 10 million seller? Well, how about the fact that they completely debacled this second wave of DLC and the director, is ousted out and all this stuff. Clearly, they were still having problems despite whatever success was probably mostly just making up for lost funds for all the money and resources that had been put in this project for so many years. They're just recouping costs, more or less, rather than actually making profit, is the point I'm getting at. But you cancel the live stream.
Yeah.
You cancel the live stream and you put out a press release. You don't go on with the live stream as if everything's fine and then announce it this way. It's just bafflingly stupid. Management. It's so bad.
They send the brand manager out there basically to be executed. It's crazy, man.
It's what are you doing? What are you doing?
And you know what? Shout out to him for even doing that, right?
Yeah, right.
Because if I were in that position, I would be like, no, you, Yosuke Matsuda, you go out there and you tell the fans that we're canceling the DLCs.
Yeah.
Right? Don't send me out there to be executed for your decision.
Yeah. Just absolutely wild. So anyway, wanted to bring up that point. That was one thing you talk about in your video that I guess supports the assertion being made here that the entire thing was mismanaged, despite whatever large sales success they had with Final Fantasy XV. It still was a very poorly mismanaged game. Much of the content that they planned to release was cut, and that doesn't happen for something that is this huge success and everyone's celebrating internally. We did it, guys. We pulled it off.
Right.
You don't make decisions like that if you're raking in a bunch of money. So anyway, appreciate you coming on, dude. Yeah. This has been great. I always love to have you here. I wanted to ask you this. I'll cut this out if it's not happening, but you are going to be in London for the Sakimoto concert, right?
Yes, I'm going to be there. We're going to actually get to meet in person for the first time.
Yes. So
I'm excited.
So both I and Ryan and Daryl from Final Fantasy Union and other Final Fantasy creators are going to be in London on June 13th for the Hitachi Sakimoto 40th anniversary concert. So it's 40th anniversary of his career, right? So they're going to be performing music from a whole bunch of his games over his entire career span. But, Final Fantasy Tactics, Final Fantasy XII, Odin Sphere, 13 Sentinels, a bunch of other stuff from the Vanillaware titles he's done and stuff he did at Square in the past. It's going to be really, really cool. I will pin as a comment and also put it in the description the details for this event where you can go and look at it. But there's going to be events happening throughout the day that Ryan and I will be involved in. You'll get a chance to meet us. And I will be there for days leading up to it. So anybody who wants to meet up with me, you can reach out to me in Discord on DM. And we can talk about doing a meetup. But go check that out because that event is going to be awesome. We're both going to be there. We're both excited for it. And yeah, I'm excited to meet you in person for sure. I think that's going to be...
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
What has it been now? 5-6 years that we've occasionally back and forth chatted and collaborated?
At least 6. Yeah, at least 6. Well, because I think like the first time I came on the podcast was like right after FF7R launch.
That's right. I think you're right. I think that was the first time we talked.
Bare minimum 6.
Yeah. So 6 years that we've been talking, and now we'll get a chance to meet in person. So I'm looking forward to that. But go watch his video. That will also be linked in the pinned comment description, things like that. It's to me the most comprehensive retrospective on Final Fantasy XV's development and everything that went into that. And it deserves way more views than it has gotten so far. So please go watch it. And subscribe to Night Sky Prince. Appreciate you coming on, dude.
Anytime.
All right. See you guys next time. Peace out.